Hello. Welcome to our last lesson in the book of Proverbs, chapter 31. If we began to name heroes of the Old Testament, who would you name? Perhaps Noah, Moses, David, Elijah, or one of many others. But what about the heroines, the women who are heroes? Perhaps it's Abraham's wife Sarah, or good Queen Esther, or Rahab from Jericho that aided the spies of Israel, or Deborah the prophet that led the army, or Ruth. Today we find in Proverbs chapter 31 a hero of a different sort, the valiant woman, or as it's often translated today, the virtuous woman. Though the context is different than the usual heroes, we find that some of the same vocabulary is used to describe our hero. This woman is valiant or strong, just as mighty men of valor in 2 Kings chapter 24. The food and clothing and income she provides for her household is described as the spoil or gain, which is another military term. And you see examples of that in Numbers 31 or Deuteronomy 2 or Joshua chapter 8. And as she approaches her work, it says she girds her loins with strength. The ESV translates that dresses herself with strength, which is a striking image associated with heroic or difficult action. And then in verse 25 today, you'll find she laughs at the time to come as one who overcomes, like a victorious warrior or a victorious king. And her husband declares that she has done valiantly. The ESV says done excellently, which was another phrase linked to warfare in 1 Samuel, in Psalms. So the description of Proverbs 31 woman expands any narrow ideas of the role of the homemaker. In verses 11 and 18, she generates substantial income in business. In verse 16, she engages in manual labor. In verse 30, she scorns mere physical beauty. In verses 13, 19, and 22, she sews. In verse 15, she cooks. In verses 11, 12, and 23, she is her husband's helper. And then, by the way, she's raising her children and making a home for the family. But to determine the true hero qualities, we must evaluate one through God's eyes. In Solomon's time, Israel's neighbors celebrated women for their erotic allure. Proverbs 31:30, though, says, and it would sound strange to one of the Canaanite neighbors, charm is deceitful, beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. So this woman in Proverbs was counterculture in that day and is counterculture to much of our modern world today. Alistair Roberts, who's a British theologian, says, our failure to see the heroism and strength of such a diligent and active woman is a failure to see the world as God does. So we'll begin with verse 1 of chapter 31. The words of King Lemuel, an oracle that his mother taught him. We don't know who King Lemuel was. He's not anybody that we know elsewhere in the Bible history. He's not one of the kings of Israel or Judah, and he probably lived long before the monarchy was even established in Israel. Although he was not part of the history of the covenant people of God, he was clearly a man that knew God. He's just like Job, who knew and served God in his generation without being included in any of the genealogy of our salvation history. Jewish tradition may say that it was Solomon and his mother Bathsheba, but that is only tradition, and we find no support for that. Verse 2, what are you doing, my son? What are you doing, son of my womb? What are you doing, son of my vows? So the mother uses the word what 3 times here in asking her son, son, what can I give you and what can I tell you that will carry you through life as a king? So even though her son is an adult, she treats him as her little boy, whom she had dedicated to the Lord, just like when Hannah lent her son Samuel to the Lord, just like baby dedication day that we have in our church. So what was mother's advice? What was her warning? She says, don't waste your life pursuing sexual adventures or clouding your mind with alcohol. Verse 3, do not give your strength to women. When she speaks of strength, she speaks of the heart's appetite, the heart's direction, the things that the heart pays attention to. She says, do not be distracted by lust and sensual pleasure. Your ways are your ways to those who destroy kings. When she talks about ways, she speaks of direction, the path you choose. She says, be careful who you yield yourself to. We're told in 1 Kings chapter 11 that King Solomon loved many women, and his wives turned his heart away from God. Verse 4, it is not for kings, O Lemuel. She says, Lemuel, remember, kings have responsibilities. You can't lead people if you dissipate yourself on what isn't valuable or lasting. It's not for kings to drink wine or for rulers to take strong drink, lest you lose self-control, lest they drink and forget what has been decreed and pervert the rights of all the afflicted. She says, craving intoxicants is not for kings. The intoxicants will cloud your judgment. We see this in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 18, where it says, and do not get drunk with wine, which causes you to lose self-control, for that is debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit, who gives you self-control. That is a fruit of the Holy Spirit. She says, give strong drink to the ones who are dying. Give wine to those who are in bitter distress. Let them drink and forget their poverty or remember their misery no more. And as you recall, the soldiers tried to give this to Jesus on the cross in an attempt to deaden the pain. Verse 8, she says, open your mouth for the mute. That is, speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. Speak for the rights of all who are destitute. Open your mouth. Judge righteously. Defend the rights of the poor and the needy. Now, Mother is going to spend the whole rest of the instruction in this chapter telling Lemuel how to go about choosing a wife, a queen, someone who is smart and industrious, creative, compassionate, and kind, loves people, loves her husband, loves God. Now, I selected a poem. It's called My Love, and it goes like this. My heart doesn't belong to me. You have its only access key. Life is meaningful because of you. Our bonding is priceless, always new. Valuable you are, indeed precious. Eternity is what I wish for us. You say, why put a poem there. That poem is an acrostic poem where each line begins with a letter that forms the words for the title, My Love. And I bring this out because Proverbs 31 is an acrostic poem where each line begins with one of the 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet in sequence. And this was written in this way in hopes that it would encourage people to memorize these words of truth. And the poem was traditionally recited by the husband and children at the Shabbat table every Friday evening. So every Friday evening was an opportunity for husband and children to show mother their appreciation for what she meant to them and how special she is, how godly she is. Verse 10, an excellent, a virtuous, a valiant wife, who can find her? How can anyone live up to this? She is a remarkably gifted woman, successful in everything she attempts over a broad range of life, a woman without flaws. It says she is far more precious than jewels or rubies. The Eshet Sha'il is the Hebrew term for virtuous woman or woman of valor. Eshet is the word for woman, and Sha'il is defined as valiant, strong, virtuous. In the Amplified Bible, Eshet Sha'il is translated an excellent woman, one who is spiritual, capable, intelligent, and virtuous. This term, Eshet Sha'il, or the virtuous woman, is only found in the Bible 3 times. We see her referenced once in the book of Ruth and twice in the book of Proverbs. In the book of Ruth, we see a brave widow sacrifice her own well-being and prosperity to take care of her mother-in-law as she goes out on a limb to provide for her family. Her kindness, her generosity, and faith in the face of adversity are valued and earned her the title Woman of Valor, Woman of Virtue, Woman of Excellence. And you can find that in Ruth chapter 3, verse 11. So this woman is not just a man's dream woman, but is the woman as God intended her to be. She is the blueprint for the godly woman. And her value is far above material wealth, material things that don't automatically bring joy or contentment. Verse 11, the heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. So the woman of valor is trustworthy. She inspires 100% confidence. And there's an obviously intimacy in the relationship between the woman and her husband. You can't please somebody who won't allow you close enough, who won't be vulnerable enough to expose his needs. She does good to him all the days of her life because they've grown close and aware, knowledgeable, concerned for each other. And it says that her husband is that kind of vulnerability. He trusts her absolutely. He trusts her with his feelings, with his fears. He trusts her when he's gone away. This husband who's received good from the trust he's placed in his wife is able to say, after all of the years of their marriage, she is the best woman of all. Verse 12. She does him good and not harm. All the days of her life, The woman of valor loves him in the good times and the hard times for an entire lifetime. She makes him happy. Verse 13 says, she seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. So this woman of valor works diligently as a homemaker. It reflects her concern that her family is properly dressed. She takes pains with her duties and takes pleasure in them. Verse 14, she's like the ships of the merchant. She brings her food from afar. It says she looks for the best price, even if she has to shop around. She's a good steward of the family budget. She rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and portions for her maidens. She doesn't sleep in, she doesn't sleep late, but carefully plans her time and fills it with needful things so that no time is wasted. She feeds her family regular meals. She's generous beyond the boundaries of her family as she provides for those other women who work for her. Verse 16, she considers a field and buys it. With the fruits of her hands, she plants a vineyard. So this woman of valor is a wise, resourceful businesswoman who doesn't mind hard work with her hands. She considers the cost of purchases and whether she can afford them and whether it's a good investment. And she invests for the future. Verse 17, she dresses herself with strength and makes her arms strong. She goes to the gym and works out and lifts weights. That's not what that means. The woman of valor takes care of her health, and she clothes herself spiritually in God's word, and then she governs her household with wisdom. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. So the woman is a good manager of time and money. The woman of valor is well prepared each day and then closes the day when her work is done. Verse 19, she puts her hands to the distaff and her hands hold the spindle. And domestic duties are not beneath her dignity. Sometimes in this feminist era, some activists demean women who are at their best as homemakers, as mothers, who take care of children and who perform domestic duties. And some of these activists become bolder and become outspoken about their intent to destroy the family unit as the basic building block of society that God ordained it to be. Verse 20, she opens her hand to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. So this woman of valor is intent on giving as well as getting. She's lovingly generous and cares for those in need. And she's not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household are clothed in scarlet. In the winters of Jerusalem, it only snowed every 3 or 4 years, and not usually a lot, but occasionally it would be a severe winter with a deep snow. And it says this woman of valor never panicked, but was always prepared with clothes that were not only appropriate to stay warm, but were beautiful and appreciated by others. She makes bed coverings for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. She's good with her hands. She's practical. She makes useful things. She has a flair for good taste and beauty, and she puts in the work that's required to achieve it. Verse 23, her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. You may have heard that phrase speaking to a man, you married above your level. A compliment for sure. Part of her husband's identity is that he's the husband of this glorious woman that everyone loves and respects because she contributes so much to the community. Verse 24, she makes fine linen garments and sells them. She delivers sashes to the merchant. Strength and dignity are her clothing. People look on the outside and admire her. The fine linen garments, the sashes that are beautiful. But her son Lemuel recognizes that her true beauty is inside, that she's the kind of person God is pleased with when he looks on her heart. It says, and she laughs at the time to come. This woman of valor is so confident of the source of her strength and worth that she is assured of victory over anything the future holds for her. And her joy abounds over her assurance that her eternal happiness is certain. Verse 26, she opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. So the woman of valor is wise, but it's not the rough-edged wisdom that sounds like it came from an instruction manual. Her wisdom has this kindness, and she's able to bring sensitivity and blessing with her wisdom. Verse 27, she looks well to the ways of her household, and she does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. He says, many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. Can you imagine the warmth around that Shabbat table every Friday night? Whether it has a sumptuous feast or just simple porridge, and her husband and children are reciting Proverbs 31 poem, and they begin to tell mother how special she is. Verse 30, charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. So what is the key to this woman's success in life? The woman of valor fears the Lord. Beauty is transitory and lacks substance. It doesn't affect your standing with God. It's not an indicator of wisdom or goodness. And it can be a deceiver if a man uses it as the basis for choosing a wife. Give her the fruit of her hands and let her work praise her in the gate. So it's very clear that in her closest relationships, those within her family, there's this deep approval and mutual love. But these relationships are outstanding and we can be attracted to immediately. But it says praise also comes from outside her family. Give her the product of her hands and let her works praise her in the gates. So she gets public praise. Everybody appreciates her. In the story of the marriage of Ruth and Boaz in Ruth chapter 4, it says all of the women of the town of Bethlehem offered public praise for this woman Ruth. And in Proverbs 31, this woman is praised in public as well. So in summary, we can look at the valiant woman or virtuous woman and say, she loved her neighbors as well as herself, and she served those around her with dignity and respect, as if she considered every one of them worth the effort. She used her God-given talents as a good steward productively for herself, for her family, for her community. And she glorified God, whom she knew personally, as she obeyed him with reverential awe. I'm reminded of a story I read this week about an old World War II veteran who ate at Luby's cafeteria every day. He was so obnoxious and demanding, so unthankful, so unappreciative to the staff that they wished he wouldn't come. Except there was one woman who treated him with respect, who overlooked every fault, who went the extra mile to satisfy every complaint, including heating his meal piping hot like he wanted. The other staff wouldn't serve him. They dismissed him. But then one day he no longer came, and they all wondered what happened to Buck Sword. That is, until the estate lawyer called that kind server to tell her that Buck had left her his car and his $50,000. He had never thanked her. He had never told her he appreciated her until he died. But she was a virtuous woman. The question now is, where do you find people like this? Or better yet, where do they come from? As we've been studying in previous lessons, God says that despite this world full of brokenness that you live in, despite the fact that you're imperfect, He says, I have a plan for you. If you will A, admit you're a sinner, if you will B, believe that Jesus is who He claims to be and shed His blood as a sacrifice payment to satisfy the wrath of God for you, and if you will C, commit to let Jesus guide you in your life choices as your Lord, then He will give you a spirit to live inside you that will grow you to be what He designed you to be. Where do people like that come from? They are a work of God. And that is the lesson for this week.